Welcome to Podcast and Business. I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. Yara van Heugten is a Dutch investigative journalist. She investigates the truth behind the green promises of large companies, from the financial sector to the clothing industry. She's the author of an interesting article, Sustainable Clothing Brand Patagonia manufactures in the same factories as fast fashion. Textile workers are being exploited, published and Follow the Money. In this episode, we talk about her interesting article, what challenge and histories she found. Also, what response she received from Patagonia. Welcome, Yara. It's a pleasure to have you today as a guest. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
Yara, for this episode, we will highlight interesting points from your article published in Follow the Money on June 10, entitled Sustainable Clothing Brand Patagonia manufactured in the same factories as a fast fashion. Textile workers are being exploited. So to get into the context, when we think about the clothing brand Patagonia, the first thing that comes in our mind is sustainable business, environment, outdoors, eco-friendly, etc. If we talk a little bit about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, let's take the S. The S stand, for social. Social involve human rights, ethics, well-being, the relationship that organizations have with people, and how they treat their employees or customers, partners, and stakeholders. So speaking about that, talking about your article, Yara, I would like to start this conversation by asking you how you did develop the idea for this article and what motivated you to write about this critical topic because it's a very important company.
Yeah, so honestly, it was a mix between personal and professional reasons. I'm an investigative journalist. I did a lot of work on sustainability already, also on ESG, where I focused more on the environmental side of things. But in this specific case, my boyfriend was going to go to Sri Lanka, and I really wanted to join him. There's amazing waves in Sri Lanka. We are both surfers, but I needed a pitch to be able to join him. So I started looking into the Sri Lankan economy to figure out where there could potentially be stories that could be relevant to our audience. And I figured out Sri Lanka has a big apparel industry. I knew that about other countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, Cambodia, but I didn't know it about Sri Lanka. But when I learned that, it really triggered me because this is an industry that has so much impact. I read all the documentaries. I read many books about it. There's many sustainability issues in these industries. So I started looking at who are the brands producing there. And at one point, one lady from an NGO, she told me that it was mainly big brands like Nike, Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein producing there. But then she mentioned Patagonia. And then I was like, wait, what? Are they producing in Sri Lanka in the same factories as those other brands that you just mentioned? And then I felt like there's a story there. I had been looking into the fashion industry for a long time, and I knew there were many issues on the social side that you mentioned, the human rights side. And I was just wondering if a company like Patagonia, who has this big sustainable image, produces in the same factories as, for example, Nike, from which we know there's many issues in their supply chain. Yeah, what is going on here? That was something that I wanted to figure out.
That's really interesting how this personal situation, of going on a trip to another country trigger you to write this article. Yara, when we start a new project, we always face challenge, right? So what kind of challenge did you face while you were, writing this article about Patagonia?
Yeah, I faced many challenges doing research in Sri Lanka. One very simple example is emailing just doesn't work. You have to go there physically. You have to be there, talk to the people. And it's a big country, and they don't have great public transport system. They were in an economic crisis, so cars, gasoline was very expensive. So just, yeah, all the time I had to travel to meet all these people, that was just a practical challenge. But more interesting maybe was, of course, the language barrier, the cultural barrier that I faced. One good example maybe is that I had one interview with an employee of a factory where Patagonia was producing. I spoke to many other employees already before that point, and this was a last minute interview. So I just asked someone that I met, a local guy, if he could
Mhm.
interpret for me, because the employees, they never speak English, it's always local languages. And he said sure. He was super nice. We had a conversation already a few times, and his English was perfect. So I thought, well, he can just interpret for me. So then we were doing the interview, and I was asking questions. The guy was translating my question, and then the response came back. And a few times he wasn't giving me back her answer, but they would start discussing in the local language, and I would be, "Hey, wait, what's
Something's
going
going on
on?"
here.
And yeah. And then he was saying like, "No, no, she doesn't understand your question." So I'm trying to explain her, but this happened a few times that they were basically, it felt like they were having a discussion, so it felt really strange to
Right.
me. And then afterwards, there was another lady in the room. She spoke English, she could understand English, but she didn't want to interpret because she couldn't speak English very well.
Mhm.
And then after the whole interview, I saw I had a message on my phone from this lady saying, this guy is twisting her
Oh, wow.
words. So basically, the guy I asked to interpret,
He was saying something that is not true.
yeah, he wasn't giving back what this employee was saying, but he was just twisting somehow.
Translate and other things.
Yeah. So I couldn't use
Wow.
this interview at all because of this language barrier. And probably there was also something cultural in there, that this guy just, he didn't agree with what the lady was saying, and he just figured he'd give me his own view on things, which of course, yeah, it's I couldn't use that. So that was difficult.
But you figured out and then you wrote your article, which is the most important. Yara, there is a publication on Patagonia's website entitled Patagonia Clothing Made Where, How, Why. And it says this: we are responsible for all the workers who make our goods and all that goes into a piece of clothing that bears a Patagonian label. Why I'm saying that? Because my next question is, Patagonia doesn't have control over working conditions, right? Even if you are provider or supplier. What are your thoughts? Patagonia says something, but in the same time, in your research, you show us that it's completely different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a difference between control and responsibility. So I think they do not have control over working conditions in these factories that are, for example, located in Sri Lanka. And yeah, they said that in their response to my article, that they don't have a control
Okay.
over it. I think it's true. They are not there day to day. They are not in the same country usually. They are not in the factories on a daily basis. So they cannot control everything that's going on there, but they still have a responsibility over these working conditions. And I think the interesting thing here is that it's a choice, that to be so far away from your factories. You can use factories that are closer to home. You can own factories so that you have bigger control over your working conditions. And this was something one of the sources I spoke to said to me. Like, her name is Tulsi Narayana Sama. She's the director of advocacy at the Workers' Rights Consortium. And I had a really interesting conversation with her exactly about this topic. So what is Patagonia's responsibility, right? And she was saying that we should ask ourselves the question, why do brands like Patagonia, but all the others in the industry as well, why do they not own the factories where they produce their clothes? Why are they outsourcing? And her opinion on this was, they do not want to be responsible for the people who make their clothes. So even though Patagonia is saying on their website, we are responsible, the fact that they are making a deliberate choice not to have their own factory is telling us different, I think.
Right. No, no, I totally agree with you. And actually, it's interesting because the code of conduct suppose apply for every label supply chain from, let's see, subcontractors, sub-suppliers, is this case that you just mentioned, let's see, child labor, forced labor, harassment, you name it, environment, community, etc. When I read your article, something that really touched me was the 60 hours of work, you know in these factories. There is a woman, the name is Priya, a 31 years old woman that you mentioned in your article, who work in one of these suppliers or factories, that made the product, Patagonia product. Could you share with the audience briefly about this history about Priya? Because it's something, it's very, very sad. And also, I didn't know that the workers use drugs, to keep working.
Yeah, it was heartbreaking for me. So I spent about a week in an area where there were a lot of these factories located where Patagonia was producing. It's close to the airport of Sri Lanka, and I spent one day at the office of Ashila Dandania. She's a trade union leader. She helped introduce me to many of the workers of these factories. And so I spent a day at her office, and I heard so many heartbreaking stories of the people working in these factories. For example, I could recognize the people working for the factories that Patagonia is producing in because they were wearing yellow polos. So during the day, I could see, okay, these are people that are working in a factory that Patagonia is producing, and these are not. So it was actually easy for me to distinguish the stories from which stories were relevant to the Patagonia stories and which weren't directly. So, for example, people were coming there asking for food packages because they just don't earn enough money to eat 2 meals in a day. But they also have a whole family to take care of. And yeah, they just don't, they actually have hunger, even though they work like a full week of work. There was this other story. There was a transgender guy applied for the factories that Patagonia is producing in a few times. And even though Patagonia says in its code of conduct, no discrimination, they told him, we don't want you because you are a trans man. So it was this guy was actually sleeping in Ashila's office, like in her trade union office, because he didn't have a place to sleep. He couldn't go back to his village. Yeah, he was just living on a mattress on the floor there. So that was really touching. And then that evening, Ashila introduced me to Priya, you were referring to. That's actually not her real name
Of course,
because
to protect her.
it's
Yeah.
not safe for her to be known. But Priya, she was 31, 2 years older than me, and really inspiring. She was so bright, but also so powerful about everything that was going on in these factories. She was someone who spoke up to the management, and that didn't help her a lot, to be honest. She was talking to me about the fact that she got scolded a lot in the factories, and that was
Wow.
because of the fact that her manager, so not her direct line manager, but one level up, he's someone who is touching all the girls. And she was saying touching in a bad
Oh
way.
my
And I
gosh.
didn't know, like, I don't know
Harassment.
exactly what she meant by it. But yeah, she was saying he was touching girls in a bad way, and she spoke up about it. And since then, yeah, he kept on scolding her if she wanted to go to the bank or wanted to go to the doctor during working times, which is the only time you can go to the doctor or the bank. She couldn't go. He would scream at her like, who will meet the targets then? This is a quote. She was saying, they talk to us like we are animals. So yeah, the conditions in these factories, the factory she was working on, it felt like a different world from the world you imagine when you read the code of conduct of a company like Patagonia. She was earning about half of what
Right.
is a living wage in that area. So she could pay for a room. I saw her room. We met in her room.
Oh, did
Her
you?
room was like 12 square feet, just had one bed, like a really, really small kitchenette, and that was everything. She could pay for that, and then her meals, and that was it. It was all she could afford in a month.
And I bet she's not the only one. There are plenty of them
No,
in these kind of
yeah,
conditions, right?
definitely.
Yeah, we are living in a moment that everything is greenwashing. Companies, claim, oh, we are the best company, and you start to do some research, and really they are not. However, some companies are doing a great job. What are your thoughts? Do you think that is the Patagonia case? This case is a real example of greenwashing in this particular situation.
No, I don't think it's a clear case of greenwashing. It would have been a clear case if Patagonia would have statements on their website saying, we pay all of our employees a living wage, and that would turn out not to be true. because greenwashing is, of course, if you pretend to be more sustainable than you actually are. But if you look at the actual rules, we have many rules in Europe for what is greenwashing. It's mostly about the claims. Are the claims that you make too vague? Are the claims that you make actually false or misleading? And I digged into Patagonia's claims a lot. So I looked up what are they writing on their website, what are they saying in interviews, what are they saying in their campaigns, and I couldn't find a direct contradiction between what they are saying and the things I saw on the ground. There was not a false, like an actual false claim. But then again, if you, and this is not me saying this is also like the Authority for Consumers and Markets in the Netherlands. They are also saying about greenwashing, you need to be thinking about the overall impression that you make. And what became clear when I published this article is that so many consumers of Patagonia, they actually believed otherwise. They thought if I buy a product from Patagonia, this is being made by someone who doesn't live in poverty. And the fact that that is not true, and the fact that Patagonia is a company who has like many marketing campaigns, they have so many public messages. Somehow they created an image for themselves that is an image of doing everything good, doing the right thing, and that is not the same as what I encountered on the ground. So it's not a clear case of greenwashing because it's not like a false statement. It's not actually directly false, but still the whole image and then the reality on the ground, there's a big gap between that. And I think I would still argue that is like greenwashing.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Thank you for clarifying that. Yara, would you mind sharing with the audience what the Patagonia response was? What do you find? What they tell you?
Yes, of course. I think it's interesting to discuss this. I was in contact with Patagonia a few times during the research. Quite early on, we had some background conversations. They were actually quite easy to reach. It's not like
Oh,
other companies. Sometimes you just don't get a response, or they won't have a conversation with you. So we had two background conversations, which were interesting. We talked a lot about just what is their policy, what are the programs they are doing to try to make an impact on the ground. And then after I actually had my findings, I started questions more specific to my research. And I think their like a response can be summarized as yeah, relying on one brand to fix all of these issues is a band-aid solution, they said. And it doesn't serve the factories in the long run. They are saying we are trying to work with them, we are trying to work with other brands to improve things in the long run, but we are not directly responsible. And also, it's not like we shouldn't be the only one doing this better. So I think they had this vision of trying to improve the situation from try to fix the industry from within and take all of the other brands with them on that journey.
oh, I
I
see.
think that was their basic response. So we're trying to lift the whole industry up, and in the process, there's still things that are not going great, but we're working on it. I think that's basically the summary. But I also felt I think I'm not sure, but I think they felt a bit treated unfairly. It was just like the general response when I reflected on all of the conversations I had with them. I felt they were a bit overwhelmed maybe or mad even about the fact that I was writing this article about them.
Do you think that they expect your article about them? Do you feel that or no?
No, I think they were hoping that it would be less critical.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Well, but it's good sometimes, you know. It's very interesting that you mentioned at least the company respond you, you know. And it's true because not only Patagonia, many companies and other brands, they should work together as an industry to reduce this, child labor, many things. Human rights, etc., the minimum wage on the of these people that usually are pretty much in Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailandia, and Sri Lanka, etc., in this region. So this is important to know.
But there's actually one point I wanna make, if I may.
Yeah, please.
So yes, I think it makes sense to say we have to do this together. We have to uplift this whole industry. It's true the other brands need to be better as well. But in general, I felt their response was a bit like, but we're the best out there. We're being the industry leader. We have the best policies in place. So why this critical article? And I kind of made them accountable for paying one fourth of a living wage, for long working hours, for discrimination, for scolding in the factories, all things that are going against their own code of conduct. These things are human
Right.
rights.
Exactly.
Human rights should be the lowest bar to which we can hold companies accountable. And that is also true for Patagonia. Even if you're the industry leader, if there's human rights problems, human rights abuses in your supply chain, you can be held accountable to that. That's my belief.
Exactly. That's correct that you mentioned that. You cannot claim that you are the best brand in the world and you have human right issues in your supply chain, child labor, plenty of these situations.
Yeah, it's good to mention though that I didn't see any child labor in the factories of Patagonia.
That's great. That's great. Yara, is there anything that you would like to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think you asked me about Patagonia's response to all of this, but there's also an interesting point to other people's response. So, what did I get as responses from the audience afterwards? And I think people responded to this article basically in two ways. So, there's one group that is saying, well, they are doing better than anyone else. Tell me who's better. Why are you going after the good guys? We even lost, as Follow the Money, as an investigative journalism platform, we lost one donor because he was like,
Oh my
if you're
gosh.
going to write stories about the good guys, I'm out. And then
Uh-huh.
there's the second group of people who are saying, oh, so they're producing in the same factories as Primark. Well, then I can just buy at Primark. Then it doesn't make a difference. Well, there's so many differences between Patagonia and Primark. I mean, they produce in the same factories.
The business model is different as well.
The business model, they are putting out so many products that are like just disposable clothes. They're based on trendy things, so there's many differences. And I spoke to one girl and I think she summarized it really interestingly. She said both of these responses are basically responses from a consumer perspective. Okay, so what should I buy? Should I buy Primark, or if there's nothing else that's better than Patagonia, I can just buy Patagonia, right? But she was saying we need to look at these issues from a citizen's perspective. This is a company acting in our society, and we can hold this company accountable being a citizen without thinking directly, okay, where can I buy my clothes now? That's not the point. We can also think about these issues just
Right.
as being citizens, and I think that's really something I would want to put out there, because I only see those two responses. I'm still going to buy at Patagonia because they are the best ones, or I'm just going to buy at Primark because they are the same. And I think both of them are not the way we should think about topics like this.
Yara, where can people contact you?
Yeah, so people can find me on our website. The European website is still open. There's no paywall. So it's followed FTM from followthemoney.eu. There's an author page where you can find me and you can send me a message there. Or you can connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm really open, accepting everyone. So you can also send me a message there.
Thank you for being my guest, Yara.
It was a pleasure to talk to you about this.
I am Juan Carlos Giraldo from Boston, United States. Thank you so much, everyone.